school. You know, so over time you learn this is just like X. I remember in '04 there was a company like this. You know, how is this different? How is this the same? And I think that library of experience is really part of the ability to truly create output shorts. But ultimately, the best way to make money is to be right.
So once the position's on, Michael DeJarnette, tell us some of the risks of the mechanics of putting it on and keeping it on.
Like I said, there's a variety of regulations and operational procedures that affect short sellers. Beginning in 2005, there was a rule called Reg Show, or Regulation SHO, that really was a regulation that was supposed to affect broker-dealers more than anybody, because broker-dealers, when one party would trade with another, a broker-dealer theoretically had 13 days to deliver the securities that were sold, and it really lent itself to a lot of naked short selling, a lot of shenanigans. So it was longer than 13 days. They limited it to 13 days in 2005 with Reg Show. And then they kind of figured out that wasn't really doing what they wanted. So in 2008, when everything had hit the fan, they changed that law. It was a little bit of a knee-jerk change. They changed it to settlement date. And that changed the whole world from my perspective of short selling, really for trades, for people who are a little bit more active.
So from 13 calendar days to 3 business days?
To 3 business days. And if the clearing firm, if the brokerage firm does not, still to this day, deliver those securities, that's what creates a broker-to-broker buy-in. And as these guys, I'm sure, have experienced at some point or another, and it's quite frustrating for my clients, when a clearing firm, say it's Morgan Stanley, whoever it is, has an obligation to deliver securities to another firm, maybe UBS, they don't care who you are, why you're short, what your theory is, what your models say. They know that they owe this other firm these securities, and they're going to send them to them, and they're going to buy you in on your short. So Reg Show has been a really tough thing for us to deal with, for people who sell short as part of their strategy to deal with. One of the things that went away that was supposed to really help is the bid test, and the lack of having to get an uptick does allow people to short maybe a little bit easier. But a lot of people forget also that that's not always the case. If a stock is a circuit breaker and it's down 10%, the uptick comes back again. The other thing that you have to deal with is, like I said before, you might do all this work and find these inefficiencies in the market and find an idea that you think is a fantastic short idea, but then you go to locate or borrow the security and you just can't find it. So you can't put your short on because you can't be naked. You can't short without the borrow. And so before you really start all this work that these guys are talking about doing, you really have to make sure that you're early enough in the game, or that the securities are liquid enough that there is some availability. Because if there's no availability, you're spinning your wheels and really potentially wasting a lot of your valuable time. Because
if you can't find the borrow, can you get short other ways? In other words, say short call options.
You can buy puts, which is a great way to give yourself exposure.
Would it be expensive because you're...
It could be or it could not be. It depends on the liquidity of the security. It depends on how far out in the strikes you're going. It really depends on, and you can do spread trade. You can do option spreads that take away some of that cost. That's a whole different conversation. But you can definitely do it.
It gets complex.
But it's fine, because a lot of times if you do something that's a little more complex, it means it's too hard for somebody else to do it. It might give you an advantage. So if you're willing to, if you have the expertise to put on a bearish put spread, then it's something that might be of great benefit to you. You don't necessarily have to just build a short position in the security, but it's a traditional way to do it, and it's harder to do now in some things than it would have been in the past because of regulations. And another thing that you have to deal with that I mentioned before are the rates. If you're just going to be short, you've got to pay to be short. You don't have to pay to be long, unless you're margined up. I noticed last week, an example was a security that was a Chinese security that a column research firm came out with a bear call on, and the stock went from, I think it was roughly 10% annualized to be short the stock, to over 100, I think it was 106%. So if you're short that,
It's tough to make money though.
it really is. You have to think it's terminal right now. You have to be in your work, in your mind, you have to think that you're not gonna have to hold this more than another week or month, maybe. Because like you say, if you're in something for 3 years and it's a neg 40, it's hard to overcome that.
Brad, do you have a time stop? Some people have price targets on stocks, but it sounds like there's a timer
Well,
that's
I mean,
ticking in your head.
We have the measurement of whether or not we're right. So if we think something's going to happen and it's imminent and our work tells us that the balance sheet's only been utilized so much and next quarter there's no more cookie jar and they can't, if that's not true, if we see them get out of the noose, if you will, that's the time stop and we pull the chain. I mean, I don't want to sit around hopeful that one day maybe it'll become a bad business.
So you've got events that you're looking for.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a time stop as much as a measurement of our accuracy. Yeah.
Brett, one big change from 1985 to the present is that in '85, you got rebates on your short positions. And that was a negative, that was positive cash flow, 10% a year at times. And that was tied into, it still would be available, except that interest rates are at zero. But
So
if
when
interest
you
rates
get-
ever go back up again, there's going to be a positive cash flow short sale.
But the way you
People have
get-
forgotten that.
And that ties in with what I was talking about. They call it a negative rebate now instead of a charge.
Yeah.
Because it was previously your short stock rebate. Now it's a negative rebate, which just means we're charging you money to be short.
But the way you got that in the 1980s is you would sell the stock, you'd get the proceeds, and you could invest that collateral.
You left the cash balance.
Yeah,
You got
The
the
brokerage,
brokerage.
clear the broker.
It creates, there's a
The money market funds were paying.
The proceeds,
8 to 10%.
yeah, and it was up until interest rates went below,
Yeah.
probably 75 basis points is where it started to get sticky, when the overnight rates did. Because when you sell short, you create a cash balance that's and that cash balance created by the short, a different interest rate applies to that than to your cash balance or your regular leverage balance. That's where you would get paid in the past, and I have to assume it made things a little easier.
I would say order
Well,
of magnitude.
it was
Yeah,
a
like,
hedge.
I would say order of magnitude from like 03, 04 to now is probably 300 to 400 basis points. Which is, so you're starting behind 400 basis.
And you think that's what the average
That's the
charge
difference.
is?
I mean, now, and that's if you're not
What
short
you
heavily.
made, what you
If
made.
you're involved in a lot of heavily shorted stocks, it's 800. I mean, but if you're at the average negative 50, negative 60,
Right.
whatever, versus 2 to 3.
If it's easy to borrow.
Yeah, yeah.
George, you had a question?
Is there an industry standard as to how brokerage firms choose whose short position they're gonna close?
You know, from what all the clearing firms tell me and from what I see is on a pro rata basis throughout the clearing firms.
Really?
That's the party line and they stick to it. And
I've never been pushed over short in 13 years.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm not saying that like I'm amazing. I'm saying
Yeah.
I just asked him. He hasn't either. I don't know
But you've been
anybody who's been
with
shut down.
firms that have had some clout with the broker.
Yeah, I mean, well, not initially, but it depends on what cloud it is.
The people that I see that get pushed out are typically people that are trading.
Yeah, retail trade.
Well, not even retail, but just they're not building a position over time.
They're not stable income.
Right. They're shorting something because XYZ is a heavily shorted stock and they somehow managed to borrow it ahead of earnings. And maybe it doesn't last. But the buy-ins, I don't see them very often. I see buy-in alerts all the time.
Yeah.
Where it says you might get bought in on this, and then nothing happens typically.
Let's get to Mal's question. So if we can look inside your crystal ball, what themes or specific names are you willing to talk about publicly? Tom Landstreet,
Let me go last.
Okay. Anyone?
I'm